Hello, everyone. Welcome back to all my listeners. Hope you're all having a great day so far. And if this is your first time finding me, thanks so much and welcome. Welcome to episode 5 of my 3rd season. Now, listening to the playback on last week's episode, I wanted to apologize for all the chirping birds in the background. My windows were open. I was finally enjoying some warm weather and breezes, but those birds were chirping, so I do apologize. And today, my windows are shut tight, and in fact, my heater has clicked back on. It's back to the 40s. It's freezing. It's spring in the Midwest still, so I'm very used to it. Anyway, welcome everybody. Today is Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, I keep diving into those SMRC audits, and I keep sharing all my compliance tips. We're almost at the end of the line, right? With my 16 that I promised. Well, for now, right? There's simply so much under scrutiny. This week, I dive into TENS units. And I also roll out the red carpet and a very warm welcome for my special guest, Toni Elhoms, on this episode. I also round out today's episode with a profound note on journeys from our legendary TV talk show host, producer, actress, author, motivational speaker, Oprah Winfrey. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and drop me a 5-star rating. That really helps on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to my podcast. I really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the current industry healthcare news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So, let's get into a very special Newsworthy that features my guest today, Alpha Coding Experts, founder and CEO, Toni Elhoms. I'm so excited to introduce her to all of you. Toni is an internationally known speaker and recognized subject matter expert on medical coding, reimbursement, and revenue cycle management. She is the founder and CEO of Alpha Coding Experts, a national consulting firm specializing in the business of medicine. She holds multiple credentials with the American Health Information Management Association, AHIMA, and the American Academy of Professional Coders, the AAPC. With over a decade of industry experience, she has led and supported hospital systems, universities, physician practices, attorneys, payers, government agencies, and other entities on coding, billing, and compliance initiatives. She's a frequent contributor to various media outlets, speaker, and regular guest on industry podcasts. She created her own, the Alpha Coding podcast series, to share her industry pro tips. She also serves as a board member on the editorial advisory board of the Coding Institute. And she also leads and mentors a network of revenue cycle management professionals across the nation. She also serves as the president of the Orlando, Florida AAPC chapter. My goodness, that's simply incredible, Toni. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you, Sonal. It's really exciting to be here. I love your show, and I'm excited to dive in with you.
Yay. I love it. I love it. All right. Now, you've been an incredible impact in this space of healthcare. So many of our wannabe coders, our newbie coders, and even those of us who are experienced, right? So what's been your biggest inspiration here? What is your why?
Sure, Sonal. You know, I'm really big on this topic. I talk a lot about living in alignment with your why because I truly think that it's fundamental to everybody. And so I think professionally, my why is I love teaching and I love helping people. That's something from the very beginning of my career I discovered about myself, and I'm truly passionate about it. So oftentimes people will tell me you have a knack for taking the technical and making it relatable and simple. And so that's something that is definitely my why behind everything that I do. I've worked with a lot of physicians over the years, a lot of burnout physicians, and it's really unfortunate some of the things that they have to go through in addition to all of their other functions and responsibilities. And if I can do something to make their life easier, maybe take 20, 30 minutes off of their day because I, gave them some trick or some shortcut in their documentation, like that is so worth it to me. And that's truly why I do what I do professionally. And then I think personally, because I feel like everybody needs to have a personal and a professional why. My why is my kids. Sonal, you being a parent, everything changes when you have kids, and just being able to show them what's possible, building a business, being an entrepreneur, and kind of creating a niche is something that I'm inspired every single day to get out of bed 4:30 in the morning and just do what I do because my kids are just everything to me. And being able to show them what's possible, not necessarily a traditional path that people take, it's my why. It's why I get up every day. And I tell people, if you're getting up out of bed every day just to pay your bills, that's not your why. You need to really dig deeper because living in alignment with your why gives you a whole new sense of purpose.
I love it, Toni. Absolutely. I can hear in every word your passion comes pouring out of you. That's incredible. And I do think that's why a lot of us coders, new and experienced, are completely drawn to you. And that is an incredible why. Our physicians are burned out, have been burned out for quite some time. So absolutely, that's an incredible skill that you possess, that you offer to them to, make their plates a little bit lighter so they can continue doing all of the amazing good things that they were trained for, right? For almost a decade of their younger lives, right? In their medical school, their residency, depending on their specialty, how much extra education they had to go through. So I love hearing that. And of course, the personal why is, of course, incredible. We do what we do for our kids. Absolutely. If we have small kids, if our kids are older, like mine in high school, they see that work ethic that, mom puts in the long hours, puts it all out there. And anything can happen. Success can happen to anybody in any profession. So I love it. I love it. Love
Totally.
Those insights.
I love yours too. You take a 10,000 page document, you're like, here you go. Here's the synopsis. So it's cool.
All right. Now, all right. So, we all definitely have a past and a history. I know some about yours, but I'm hoping you can share a little bit with my listeners here today. Hopefully you can share some of those steps that you took to get here. If you can, tell us a little bit more about your journey into becoming who you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So when I graduated high school, it was a time when the economy was really bad. This was like 2007, 2008. And I had always planned to do the law school track. I was going to go to law school. I was going to be an attorney, and doing research back in that market. I mean, it was just a really depressing time for everybody. Gas prices were like $4 a gallon. People weren't taking vacations. And it was just like a totally different vibe from the world we live in today. And so I did a lot of research, and I found through extensive research that, healthcare is a multi-trillion-dollar business, a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And so kind of looking at different career paths in the healthcare sector is what initially drew my eye. And then I actually got an internship with a very small hospital in their medical records department. I remember it like clear as day. It was in the basement. Like there's like these huge like stacks of files and like paper that like you pretty much like start coughing and sneezing because there's so much dust everywhere. And so I always think back to my time in the medical records department, just as an intern. I wasn't paid or anything. And that's where I kind of got more exposure to the business side of medicine. And then from that point, I got a job in billing. And so I worked in a multi-specialty group and had exposure to oncology, hematology, primary care, urgent care, laboratory billing. And so that really was like a pivotal point in my career because I saw, so many different types of medicine and the revenue cycle of those different specialties. And I remember sitting in the billing office and the billers would always talk about the coders and how the coders are like, these like elite experts. And so I was like, what is this coding thing? And that's when I started to kind of explore that more. And what's really funny is that I used to do charge entry and we would do all of these like vitamin D tests that would never get covered by insurance company. And it's still like that today, like PSAs and vitamin Ds, like you have to have a certain diagnosis code. And for Medicare patients specifically, we had to get ABNs if, their condition wasn't covered. And I remember this is how like out of the loop I was with reality. I was like, okay, why do I have to put the GA modifier on this claim? Like, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't tell them what this is. I think it should be GAW, got a waiver. And so I started putting that on the charges that had ABNs. And then of course the coders came back and they were like, this isn't a modifier. Like, right. And then they showed me the books and I was like, oh, okay. So like we all start somewhere, right?
That's right. We do.
So with coding, I just kind of got into it. And then it's, of course, been so many different specialties. And I've worked in physician practices and hospitals. And then from coding, of course, education and auditing was just kind of a natural next step. And I always tell coders if they're in that season of their career where they're like, what else can I do? I've done surgery coding. I've done evaluation and management coding. I've worked in multiple specialties. What's next? Education, not for everybody, but it's definitely kind of that step up from just line coding. And so through the education and auditing process, you learn so much. And I also always tell people, you can't audit a specialty that you've never coded. Like you've never been in the trenches, because how are you going to audit somebody that's a lot more skilled and a lot more savvy in that specialty than somebody that's never touched it? And so when people tell me that they audit specialties, I'm like, okay, how many years did you spend in the trenches of that specialty? Because that is a prerequisite, I think, when it comes to auditing. Of course, you can, kind of figure things out, but auditing is definitely that next level. And then being able to educate providers is very difficult, because you have to take and filter what you know to be true and really make it relatable. And why is this important to the provider? That's really critical. And dealing with all these different types of personalities and, specialists. Of course, we have all those nuances of the specialties and the personalities that come with, let's say, a neurosurgeon. You have to be able to have a thick skin and be really adaptable and flexible in your environment. And then consulting. So consulting is basically having expertise in a lot of different areas. And so from the education and auditing, I went into consulting. And then I would say from that point is where I started to kind of understand the real big picture of not just revenue cycle, but healthcare and how everything kind of works together. And through my consulting career, I've worked with, government agencies. I worked with pretty much every specialty, law firms. And it's just been such an incredible experience. Again, consulting, just like education, is not for everybody, because some people like to know exactly what they're going to do every single day, and they want to do the same thing, and they want to have that structure, and that's totally fine. Consulting is you're getting thrown into the fire, and you need to figure it out. It's not something that you just type into Google and get a Google search. Somebody is coming to you because they've already tried everything. You need to figure out a way to help solve their problem or their pain points. And then, working in consulting, that's where I really identified that entrepreneurship and kind of creating my own space within the industry was what I'm passionate and what my purpose is. But it took, 10 plus years to get to a point where I discovered that. And so one of the reasons why I do my podcast is because I want to share with other people that, there's so many possibilities in this field. There's something for everybody. And there's plenty of business to go around. So, there's consultants and people out there that are very territorial about, clients and business and contacts and not sharing too much information. And I don't agree with that. I think it's important to give back and to help that next generation of HIM and coding and rev cycle professionals have access to those same opportunities.
Absolutely. Just incredible. I mean, I don't even know where to respond from. That was an incredible journey on your path. Every single step that you had to take along the way, just remarkable. I actually I myself had to start back at that same time frame in 2007, 2008, when the economy tanked. That was when my entire previous career as an art historian had come to a dead halt because of the economy. And so, like yourself, that was when I discovered medical coding, billing, trying to get my foot in the door. So yeah, I can identify right there. Absolutely. I also agree with you completely in we align very well in the sense of, based on our, over a decade of experience doing this, we want to give back to our fellow coders, billers, HIM people, CDI people, whoever. The people in this space need to hear about the multiple opportunities that are available. It just depends on what you see yourself doing, what you see yourself growing into becoming, where you see your strengths lie. And from that, you can absolutely pivot into your own next steps. Absolutely right. And it's also true that, not everybody has the critical thinking skills to be a solid consultant, right? To be able to provide that higher level of thinking, that you're absolutely correct. Providers, are doing the Google searches, or some client is already searching and they can't find the answer. So they absolutely are coming to you, for that ability, that knowledge, that insight that a solid consultant can provide. So incredible. Your insights are spot on. And I'm sure my listeners are going to be able to gravitate to something along your extensive path and grab on and take hold. And, they too can see themselves soar. Absolutely. I love it. All right, Toni. Now, over the years, you and I have spoken at length on various podcasts and platforms together regarding the desperate, right, but very thoughtful and necessary need for change in this space of healthcare. Now, I know my voice loud and clear here, which is always work smarter for coding compliance. 2021 is the year to make impactful changes towards proactive compliance. We must do better. But I want to hear your voice. What is it you would like to see happen to improve coding abstraction, to gain more coding accuracy?
Sure. So Sonal, I love your podcast, Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. It's amazing. And I think you've done such a great job. The evolution of the show has been really great. So I love your series. I listen to it every week and always learn something. And we've had some fun collaborations together over the past couple of years. I know I've had you on my show. I'm going to have you on my show again. And we're always buddies on LinkedIn. But I think it's really important that collectively as an industry, we have a change in mindset. We really have to see that the climate has changed. So for a long time, folks could fly under the radar and nobody was really looking. There wasn't really the bandwidth to support, let's say, fraudulent activity or, things like incident 2, noncompliance, or all of the, things that we see in our world. Data analytics, which I talk about, and I definitely have had Karen Weintraub on the show, and she talked about this, but data analytics, being able to look at large amounts of data and abstract trends and identify potential fraud, waste, and abuse activity, it's made it nearly impossible for folks to fly under the radar, no matter how small you are, right? So there's a lot of people that thought, okay, hospitals, they're going to go after them, right? They're the ones with the big pockets or the big 50 plus physician practices. Now we're seeing it with the onesie twosie practices. We're seeing it with everybody on paper, not on paper. So the change in mindset, I think collectively is really important. There's a lot more people, a lot more auditors, a lot more industry professionals that are looking at things with a fine-tooth comb. And Sonal, I love your episodes because you talk about the ZPIC and the SMRC and all of the acronyms. These are real things, they're real entities.
Yes.
And they're not just acronyms that we're pulling out of our head. It's real. And so we really have to embrace that change. And we have to, as revenue cycle management professionals, be champions of this change, because if we're not, we're going to do a disservice to the providers that we serve because they're not prepared for this type of change. And so I always tell folks, especially in my consulting practice, I'm not always going to tell you the answer that you want to hear. I'm not always going to give you the advice that you think that you know to be true, or maybe you pulled together off of some Google search. It's going to be based on concrete guidance and concrete guidelines and, sometimes laws, and it's up to you what you want to do with that. But that mindset and that emphasis of compliance has to be reinforced by us. And that's why, again, I love your show, because I think you're doing a great job of getting that message out there, but we need to get louder about it. Coders, specifically coders, need to recognize their value. I see so many coders, so many people in the industry that are like, are you sure that, I'm going to have a job in 5 years? Oh, there's this study out there that AI is going to do this and this, and there's so much natural language processing that's going to be absorbing coders and coding folks' responsibilities. And you need to recognize your value. If you're just doing data entry, yeah, your job's probably going to be replaced by AI. But that's not what coding is. Coding is actually way bigger than that. It requires a certain level of critical thinking. It requires, being able to analyze things in very specific ways, depending on the specialties. So this idea that coders are going to be replaced by AI, I think it's an obsolete idea. And unfortunately, it's been perpetuated by a lot of people in the industry, but EHRs didn't replace you. They tried to, but they didn't. And now we're seeing the unfortunate consequences of EHRs and sticking our providers with the responsibility of coding when there's skilled and trained professionals out there that's really their job. And in an effort to cut costs, I think that's been really a big driver behind it. But with risk-based contracts and value-based care and all of these things that we're seeing that are not going away, we're tying reimbursement to quality and outcomes. All of this is based on coding data. So a lot of times when I go into practices, they're like, we don't care about the ICD-10 codes unless it's a specialist that has really expensive drugs or meds or tests that they have to get prior authorization on. They're not necessarily looking at their ICD-10 CM codes at a fine tooth comb level. And they're going to need to do that if they want to get paid for the complexity of their patient populations, if they want to prove, that they are the best provider that's treating these patients and having the best outcomes. But there's a lot of times that's an afterthought. It's, let me just pull it into the problem list, and the provider's going to put in what they need. And you and I know, we look at charts all the time. Most of the time, those diagnosis codes are incorrect. They're non-specific. They're not communicating what's going on with that patient today, not what happened 10 years ago. And so I think coders have to advocate for themselves, and they have to really recognize their value in the greater picture. And coding influences so much more than just, claim forms. They influence policy. They influence statistical tracking, diseases, mortality rates. So it's so much bigger than just the day-to-day, taking codes and slapping them on a claim form. It's so much bigger than that. I think ongoing training and education also has to be a really big focus. And again, I come in all the time to consulting practices, and I tell them this, I'm like, you have to invest in regular training. You have to do ongoing education. This is not a one and done thing. This is not a once every 3 years type of thing. This is an ongoing thing. And if you're going to operate a business, you have to treat it like a business. And part of that is education and training on what is compliant, because what's compliant today may not be compliant in 2 days, right? Sonal,
that's right. Things change all the time. Things change all the time.
So crazy. So that education and training, specifically with coding and compliance, is again something that we have to work hard and get loud about championing, and figure out how to get your providers buy-ins. If you have providers that are not bought in, then you're going to be working against yourself when you're trying to do education. I always tell folks, if you have the opportunity to find a champion, a provider champion within an organization, even if they don't have one, recruit one. Find out who's the most respected, provider in that organization, and get them on your side, because they're going to be a lot more effective in the training and education process and helping you than just you sometimes. And so I think that's hard for coders sometimes to step aside and take their ego out of it and see that, yes, they have the information and the value, but maybe they're not going to be the ones that resonate with the providers in their organization. So we really have to strive to get that buy-in. And then I think as far as the, contracting, we're seeing obviously fee for service is going more towards value-based contracting. The majority of payment methodologies are still fee for service, and it's of course a slow process in healthcare, but value-based care is not going away. The idea that the more care you provide is a reward versus how well you provide care, I think is just completely backwards. And it doesn't align with the sustainability of a healthcare system. So again, we're taking that mindset of not just CPT and HCPCS codes in the pro fee world, but really emphasizing more of the complexity of the patient population through comprehensive diagnosis coding. And then the last point is, this is a touchy one, Sonal. So there's a lot of activity in the international markets. We're seeing a lot of activity in the UAE and the Philippines and India. There's a lot of growth. And I think there's a lot of people in our industry that are afraid that this growth is going to somehow impact the viability of American coders, American, people in America that do these jobs. And I understand that hesitation. I definitely get that. But what I'm saying is, these countries are trying to get their coding systems off the ground. This is a good thing. Actually tying codes and reimbursement is a good thing in the international market. And so I think we really need to encourage that, because it's not just about cost reduction in labor. And we've seen what happens with that. We've seen lots of hospital systems go bankrupt. We've seen companies that have, tried that route and have not been successful. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the evolution of coding data being used in an international at an international level, not just for statistics and mortality and data tracking purposes, but as a model for reimbursement. So I think those are definitely some areas.
I mean, incredible. Your insights are vast and spot on. I could not agree with you more on the fact that coders have to get louder, have to really be very, very clear about what they do, right? That's so well said. We all kind of need to, have a kumbaya moment, band together, and shout from the rooftops all the things that we do. We do not just put little HCPCS and CPT and ICD-10 codes on a claim. That is not what we do. So I absolutely agree with you completely. There's so much championing for ourselves, provider champion. There's so much, everything I agree with. That is incredible. All of your insights, profound.
Thanks, Sonal.
Now, I can't believe our time together is almost over. But just to wrap this up, I have one more question for you. So, Toni, what are you still striving for? Where am I going to see Toni Elhoms and Alpha Coding Podcast or Alpha Coding Experts LLC? Where are you going to be in the next 5 years?
We're going to be at the forefront of change. We're going to be leading the way. And I love this question because I get excited about the future. It's definitely going to be scaling and expanding Alpha Coding Experts. We are here to stay. It's an exciting time to truly be experts in the field, and to have a team of experts is, again, it's all about timing. So scaling Alpha Coding is my passion. It's almost like my baby. And so we're going to continue to just grow and expand our presence. We do a lot of work in the legal world. So this is a very exciting time for us. Alpha Coding Podcast, which is my podcast, has been a huge success. We're rated as the #1 podcast series by FeedSpot, which is so cool.
Fabulous.
Yes. And when I started the podcast, of course, it was never about having, so many listeners or downloads. It was really just about sharing my experiences and trying to inspire other folks. And also the questions that I get every day, like, the million DMs of, can you do this? And what about this? And how do you do this? You have that library to refer people to. So I'm kind of in that next phase of being an influencer with the podcast. And so now I'm getting approached by, brands, companies for sponsorships and advertising. So it's really cool.
Excellent. Love
it. It's cool. And then lots of professional speaking engagements. I'm doing motivational speaking, keynoting. That's something that I'm super passionate about. It's just one of my favorite things to do. Maybe I'll be on a TED Talk. Who knows?
That sounds great. I think you would kill it there. Definitely.
It would be fun. It definitely would be fun. And then focusing on, of course, my growing family. We're going to have another baby, which is super exciting. Yay. So, lots of work and life balance we're trying to constantly achieve here.
Absolutely. Wow. I cannot wait to see all the incredible that you're going to be doing in the next 5 years and beyond. All of those things are incredible, and you can definitely achieve any one of them. Incredible. Amazing. Now, Toni, where can my listeners find you? I know we share some of our people together, but so many of us are not connected to you. So where can my listeners find you?
Sure. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. And then my podcast, Alpha Coding Podcast, we're everywhere: Apple, YouTube, Spotify. And then if you want to come see us on our website, alphacodingexperts.com.
Excellent. Excellent. So I'm going to make sure that I put all of those details in my show notes. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today, Toni. I always, always, always love talking to you and collaborating with you. And I can't wait to have you on again in the future. So thanks.
Likewise. Likewise, Sonal. I love your show. It's amazing. You're doing great work. And thank you so much for sharing your audience with me.
Thanks, Toni. I'll see you next time. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. Let's dive into my compliance tips here in part 13 of my SMRC audits that are blasting in across the country. Remember, these are a part of the 16 new Unified Program Integrity Contractor, the UPIC audits, that are being conducted via the Supplemental Medical Review Contractor, the SMRC, at Noridian. Their function is to conduct nationwide medical review of Parts A, B, and DME providers and suppliers as directed by CMS. It's the responsibility of the SMRC to review medical records and related documentation to ensure that claims are processed in accordance with CMS guidelines. Now, I provided you with the details for 12 audits in earlier episodes that involve DME supplies in non-covered skilled nursing facilities, or SNFs, and spinal cord stimulators, and outpatient hyperbaric oxygen therapy called HBOT, and diabetic testing strips called DTS, and polysomnography called sleep studies, and inpatient rehabilitation facilities, also called IRFs, and more SNFs, and specimen validity, and therapeutic shoes for diabetics, and intravenous immune globulin, and botulinum toxins, and finally, DRG for thyroid, parathyroid, and thyroglossal procedures that are also current audits in the SMRC's spotlight. So let's dive into part 13 of SMRC audits. The 13th is titled 01-032, TENS Notification of Medical Review. Now, TENS is short for transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. Now, Noridian SMRC is conducting post-payment review of claims for Medicare DME claims for TENS services billed on dates of service from January 1st, 2018 through December 31st of 2019. Remember, these are the time parameters. This notification includes the reasons for the review, documentation that will be requested in the additional documentation request letter, the ADR, and resources that providers and suppliers may wish to consult with as they're submitting their claims. Now, some background on the why, right? Why on earth is this 13th audit happening? So let's go over some background details. Now, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, remember, our TENS, is effectively used to treat types of chronic intractable pain and acute post-operative pain. That's our post-op pain. Now, earlier in 2018, the Comprehensive Error Rate Testing, the CERT, Medicare Fee-for-Service Improper Payment Report, identified an improper payment rate of a gigantic number. 93% was the improper payment rate, 93% for the TENS service. The CERT report also identified 95.9% of improper payments were actually attributed to insufficient documentation, as well as 0.1% was actually related to the lack of medical necessity. So, of course, CMS therefore has requested the SMRC to complete a review of the charges for TENS services. So the SMRC project will look at both rental and purchases of TENS units and associated supplies for improper payments in relation to, of course, insufficient documentation and lack of medical necessity. So, of course, the reasons for this review are critical. They're narrowing it down in scope for us. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. So this TENS project will focus on TENS units and associated supplies billed for chronic intractable pain as well as acute post-op pain. Now, the scope also involves Noridian SMRC performing data analysis and conducting medical record review. Noridian SMRC will complete their data analysis and review activities in accordance with applicable statutory regulatory, and sub-regulatory guidance. They are honing in on 5 HCPCS codes. Now, the first HCPCS code under scrutiny is HCPCS code E0720, which is defined as transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation device. That's our TENS unit. 2-lead localized stimulation. The second HCPCS code under scrutiny is HCPCS code E0730, which is defined as transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation device. That's our TENS unit. 4 or more leads for multiple nerve stimulation. Now, the third HCPCS code under scrutiny is HCPCS code E0731, which is defined as form-fitting conductive garment for delivery of TENS, with conductive fibers separated from the patient's skin by layers of fabric. Now, the fourth HCPCS code under scrutiny is HCPCS code A4595, which is defined as electrical stimulator supplies, 2-lead per month. And the fifth and final HCPCS code under scrutiny is HCPCS code A4557, which is defined as lead wires per pair. Now, of course, there are even more requirements, right? Our documentation. We can't forget about that. So I'm going to go over a list of 12 specific, very specific documentation requirements that will be listed out in your ADR letter. These are the items that you will have to furnish to support your claims that have already been paid, right? Now that you're under review in this post-payment audit. So the first documentation requirement is for that certificate of medical necessity, the CMN, if that's applicable. The second documentation requirement is going to include that face-to-face exam related to the TENS unit and supplies that are billed, if that's applicable. The third documentation requirement involves the clinical evaluations, the physician's evaluations, consultations, progress notes, physician's office records, and other medical documentation to support medical necessity. The fourth documentation requirement involves that written order prior to delivery, or the WOPD, or the detailed written order, the DWO, if those are applicable. And make sure to indicate the date, that supplier's date of receipt of the WOPD on or before the date of delivery. Now, the fifth documentation requirement is going to be that documentation to support the refill requirements were met for the supplies dispensed, if that's applicable. The sixth documentation requirement involves the proof of delivery, or the POD, for the items that were delivered. The seventh documentation requirement involves the documentation to support the medical necessity for the TENS unit and related supplies for one of these indications. The first indication being acute post-op pain. So be sure that there's a date of surgery. Be sure that there's the nature for the surgery, and be sure that you have the location and the severity of pain. Now, for the second indication, that involves chronic pain other than low back pain. Make sure you involve the location of the pain. Make sure you talk about the severity of the pain. Make sure that there's duration of the time that the patient has had the pain. Make sure you include treatment modalities that are tried and or failed. Make sure you include the presumed etiology of the pain, and make sure you include reevaluations of the patient at the end of the treatment trial period, which means how often did that patient use the TENS unit? What was the duration use of each time that TENS unit was actually applied? And also include the results. What was the effectiveness of the TENS therapy? And the third indication is for the chronic low back pain. Make sure you include the participation in an approved only study, such as at clinicaltrials.gov. Include that identification number as well, if it's applicable. And be sure to note the qualifying diagnosis, which describes the chronic low back pain. Now, the eighth documentation requirement is the documentation to support the continued need of the TENS device, if that's applicable. The ninth documentation requirement is for the supporting coverage if it exceeds the usual utilization, right? If your use exceeds the time, make sure that's well documented. The 10th documentation requirement is for HCPCS code E0731, right? Include the documentation for the brand, the name, and the model number of the garment that's conductive. Make sure that documentation is there to support the need for the conductive garment. The 11th documentation requirement is for that advanced beneficiary notice of non-coverage, if that's applicable. And the 12th and final documentation requirement is, of course, for that valid electronic and or handwritten physician and other clinician signatures. Or you must also submit those signature logs and signature attestation statements. Please submit those if the physician and clinician signatures are simply illegible. So, wow, that's a lot of documentation. So you can see why the error rate is so high for insufficient documentation, right? Those are a lot of requirements. So I hope you play this podcast again to ensure that you're following all those checks and balances. So remember, these post-payment audits are a sign. They're a huge signal that something may be amiss in your documentation, your coding, and billing. These 12 requirements are a very, very good reminder that you should be making checklists and improving your workflows and efficiencies at your practice to ensure all documentation is being captured, coded, and billed compliantly for all applicable statutory and regulatory guidelines. So, a better, smarter approach is one that's proactive and starts by painting a clear, rich, and vibrant medical picture the first time, so your certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from our very own celebrity philanthropist and legendary icon, Oprah Winfrey. The key to realizing a dream is to focus not on success, but significance. And then, even the small steps and little victories along your path will take on greater meaning. Absolutely right. I think this is a perfect quote that reminds us each step in our journey is significant. We should marvel in each step. There is no hurry, no need for a sprint to success. Instead, remember to celebrate all the steps involved, all the hills climbed to eventually get to your happy place, whatever that success is to you. I am happy Oprah Winfrey's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. Please go out and make this a great day, an incredible week for yourselves. Aim a little higher, do a little more, and give back in any way you can in 2021. There's so much each one of us can do. As always, I appreciate you diving into today with me. And if you want more information from me, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please continue staying safe and healthy, practice safety for one and all during our collective life in the time of coronavirus. Can't wait till I stop saying that. Thank you for listening in on today's very special episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.